The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
You know this if you listen to this show, that I'm a big fan of what Dan Patrick does, particularly with his interviews. And most shows, I pull something from what he's done. And he's the best sports interviewer in the business, in my opinion. And he's got the best booker in the business, and Todd Fritz, who I've known for 35 years. So the combination of great guest, great interviewer, and I'm pulling the highlights of it to play them for you. I think that's a good combination. Got something at 10 o'clock today that is the best of what I've ever heard from Dan Patrick. Now, he did his job as well as you could possibly do it. Got out of the way for the great Brent Musberger. And Musberger on yesterday, do yourself a favor. If you're a fan of Brent Musberger and you grew up in the 1970s watching the NFL Today and watching his work as he did the NBA Finals and was just the guy for CBS for all those years, and then later, moving over to ABC, and he's had just a fabulous, fabulous career. Do yourself a favor if you're a fan. Go watch the whole thing on YouTube. It's a 20-minute interview. I'm going to play a few of the segments coming up at 10 o'clock, including the story of the iconic photo of Joe Namath sitting in a lounge chair in Miami a couple of days before the Super Bowl, surrounded by a group of reporters, which included a young Brent Musberger who was working for a newspaper in Chicago at the time. And the backstory of that is just fabulous, and I'll get to that at 10 o'clock. Meantime, we have, for the Super Bowl, a new leader, in my opinion, in the clubhouse for the most ridiculous question. Now, I think unfairly, the question that's often mentioned as being the worst of all time is the one that was allegedly asked of Doug Williams before Super Bowl 22, when, as the story goes, a reporter said to him, "Doug, how long have you been a black quarterback?" And I've even heard Doug Williams repeat that as if that was the question that was asked. That was not the question that was asked. It was Doug Johns of the Clarion Ledger, a newspaper in Mississippi, and he had covered Doug Williams when he played at Grambling, so he was familiar with him, may have even known him a little bit. And he said, "Doug," he said, "obviously you've been a black quarterback your whole life. When did it start to matter?" Because it was historic. Doug Williams was the first African-American quarterback to start a Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl. We'd played 21 of them at that point, and there had not been an African-American quarterback who had played. So it was historic. It was noteworthy. The problem at the time was there was, no footage of it. There were no TV cameras rolling, and people didn't have the cell phones where you could record the interviews. There may have been a recording somewhere, but it hasn't surfaced. And so there was a little note in the San Diego Union Tribune. The Super Bowl was in San Diego that year. And it said that somebody in one of the media sessions had asked Doug Williams, "How long have you been a black quarterback?" That was not the question that was asked, but once it was out there and all the reporters from all over the country and all over the world reading the San Diego Union Tribune had a little nugget to go with, so they all put it in their stories, and that's how at the time, this was 1988, that's how things went viral in January of 1988. That would not happen today. This is, to me, the most incredible question that's been asked in now 58 Super Bowl prep weeks. And I've been to a bunch of them. I've probably been to 20, 25 of them over the years and have gone to many of these media sessions, many of them. And there have been some ridiculous questions asked, no doubt about it, including, I remember Marv Levy being asked boxers or briefs. But this is over the top. This came yesterday during the Chiefs media session, and the question that was asked to one Andy Reid.
A question from Germany. Yes. As you said before, times have changed a lot. The internet, mobile phones. What do you say about the conspiracies that have popped up concerning Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, like some kind of Republican conspiracies, that you guys made it into the Super Bowl to actually secretly re-elect or help re-elect President Biden?
That's way out of my league. very similar to me speaking German. Listen, we appreciate, I appreciate the question. She's been great. We had a nice visit with President Biden. That's about as far as I can go last year.
Now, that's not even like, Howard Stern used to have his guy Stuttering John ask crazy questions. That really wasn't that. And he sounded confused, like a Republican conspiracy to get Joe Biden reelected with the Chiefs making the Super Bowl. I mean, that's as Meshuggah as it gets. And, Andy Reid, it's not his first rodeo, obviously, and is prepared for ridiculous questions. Maybe not one that ridiculous, but, just sort of gave it the forearm shiver there, as he liked to do when he played guard back at BYU in the day, and they moved on. So I don't know if that'll be remembered as the most ridiculous question, but it's got to be in the conversation. I would think so. So there you go. German reporter, conspiracy theory, Chiefs in the Super Bowl, Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce to get Biden reelected. Get your head around that one. We'll have more Super Bowl yak coming up, of course, the Brent Musberger stuff and much more. Also, Jim Nantz was on yesterday with a couple of things, including how he's going to be broadcasting the game and what's going to be in his coat pocket when he does the game. Yeah, we'll get to that in the 10 o'clock hour as well. Meantime, more follow-up on the hiring of Dan Quinn as the head coach and Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator. And what we can expect from that, and plus getting Joe Quinn here as the defensive coordinator, all that stuff. So Bram Weinstein is in Vegas this week. If you've been listening in the afternoon, he's on Radio Row, and he had KJ Wright on yesterday. KJ Wright, former linebacker with the Seattle Seahawks, played there when Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator. So Bram, when he had him on, asked him the obvious question about Quinn.
What do we need to know about him?
I love DQ.
Yeah?
Awesome man, awesome coach. And one thing that really, really I appreciate about DQ was his transparency. He's going to be honest with you. He's going to hold you accountable. He doesn't care if you're the starting linebacker or the practice squad DB.
Yeah.
He holds everyone to a very, very high standard, and he keeps it all the way real.
Okay.
So for a guy to come in here, understand the X's and O's very well, calls the right plays at the right time, that's what makes an outstanding defensive coordinator. But you talk about a leader of men, a leader of young men, DQ has that it factor. So I'm so excited. I believe Washington Commanders really got a nice treat in him.
He did tell us he's not going to call the plays.
What?
He told us that. Yeah.
Why not?
He's given that to Tony Witt, his new defensive coordinator.
Okay. DQ, if you can hear me right now, please listen to me. Listen to me, Dan. We fell in love. We fell in love with that guy that's sitting in that booth with his hat backwards, just like screaming with that call sheet, calling plays, like Deron Bland, all those pick sixes, the way he used Michael Parsons, called him at the right time. Like, this is your juice. This is your it factor. We want this brain on game days. And so I really hope that he reconsiders, because we brought you in here because of what happened in Dallas. We love your leadership skills. We love how the defense performed. Come call plays so we can have that same type of success each and every Sunday.
Okay. All right. Well, I will send along.
Clip it up, and
I'll
play.
Send it to him. Because when he said he was doing that, we were a little surprised because of the success he's had everywhere he's been. But with Tony Witt, he was with him in Dallas, with him in Atlanta, knows him, was their secondary coach, or was their passing game coordinator coach. You mentioned Bland, the season Diggs had the year before.
Yes.
Clearly, this is someone who's, I think, going to help our secondary for sure.
Yeah, for sure going to help the secondary, and you want your coaches to grow. You want to obviously wean them to be that type of guy. But give him the defensive coordinator label. Let him run the meetings. Let him create the game plan. Let him get ready for this moment. Let him call the plays in preseason. But with the first year as a head coach, I'm really trying to get this organization turned around. New management, new ownership. I would like to wean him, after maybe that second year to call plays. And be the guy that gets this done. And I can trust myself. This is my team. This is my baby. I can really trust myself to really make sure that we on point, especially on defense.
All right. So what was special about him? It was his energy. Was it his game planning? What was it that helped you all kind of achieve what you guys were able to achieve with him?
With as good as we were, obviously we have Hall of Famers left and right. Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas, Sherm, whole enchilada. What he really mastered was, I've had some play callers when the call comes in, I'm like, what the heck are we doing in this situation? It's third and 7. You calling this play out of nowhere. We haven't practiced it since God knows when. DQ just had a real net for when the call came in. You like, perfect play call.
Now, okay, that's a campaign from KJ Wright, a former linebacker for Seattle who played for Dan Quinn when Quinn was the defensive coordinator there, campaigning for Quinn to call the plays. And I can understand it from his standpoint. That's how he dealt with Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn was not his head coach. Pete Carroll was the head coach, and he took care of everything else. Quinn was focused on the defense. Quinn, having been through a head coaching experience in Atlanta where he got a team to a Super Bowl, didn't win, and then had a couple of off seasons and got fired 5 games into 3 seasons after the Super Bowl, he's learned some things. And I'm sure he appreciates what KJ Wright had to say to Bram yesterday. But at his news conference this week, he made it pretty clear he ain't calling the plays on defense.
The big thing to get across, like the essence of a head coach is to put it all together. It's not to be an offensive coach or a defensive coach or a special teams coach. Like, it's everything. And that's what the essence is of the job. It's the chemistry. It's the messaging. It's the play style. It's the attitude. It's the swagger. Like, that's my number one job, to make sure all of this comes together. Obviously, I cut my teeth on the defensive side, so that part's important, but Joe will call the plays on defense and Cliff will call the plays on offense, and I'll certainly be there. The game management portion is so critical, so I wanted to make sure the best version of me, like I said, is coaching the entire team and making sure our play style is so right that it's a nightmare for teams to play against, between the personnel, that Adam puts together, the scheme from the coaching side, and then quite honestly for me, the play style, to say playing against us is really hard. And the attitude, the speed, the effort, the ball hawking, the tackling, the finishing of blocks, the explosive plays, that's how, we create a nightmare to go against, and we're going to work our ass off to do that. But as far as play calling, I'll be involved with it, but those guys will call the game. But the essence of this job as a head coach isn't just to be on one side. It's to tie everything together, and that's when I'm at my best, and so that's what I'll do.
So there you go. So as much as KJ Wright and maybe others would like Dan Quinn to call the plays on defense, that's not happening. It's just going to be Joe Wright. I think Bram referred to him as Tony Wright. It's Joe Wright who's coming in from Dallas to do that. So Joe Witt. See, we got to get these names straight. Cliff Kingsbury, everybody knows. It's Joe Witt. How many times can you butcher that name? But the sentiment from guys who played for him as a defensive coordinator. I'd be interested to hear from a defensive player from Atlanta. I'm not sure whether he called the plays there or not. He probably did, and I think he's learned that that's not what you want to do. Now, at the end of the Ron Rivera run, after he made the change, firing Jack Del Rio, he said he had his most fun calling the plays. And I believe that Ron Rivera is still in the mix for the Cowboys. There's also some talk that Rex Ryan could get that job, that Ryan has reportedly interviewed for it. He interviewed for the Denver job last year. So the old Cowboys, they're not necessarily done yet. One other Super Bowl note from yesterday, which I found to be kind of humorous. What's happened in Carolina as the new owner has run through one coach after another, including Matt Rule, who got fired a couple of years ago and is now the coach at Nebraska. And he was telling the media, when he was asked about his Carolina experience and so forth, that he wanted Brock Purdy, that he wanted to draft Brock Purdy, but was shot down by the staff. He said, when I was in the draft room, I brought his name up. I said, hey, guys, we should have him on the draft board. I got vetoed on that one. Instead, the Panthers drafted quarterback Matt Corral of Ole Miss in the 3rd round. Corral didn't play in a single regular season game for the Panthers and then was claimed off waivers by the Patriots ahead of this past season, but ultimately was released in mid-September. That's one of those. It's not so much what it would have meant to have Brock Purdy in Carolina for Matt Rule. It's highly unlikely that even if he somehow, became the starter 5 games into the season, that he would have been as good as he is in San Francisco. Now, there's a lot of criticism of Brock Purdy, and we're going to get to in the next hour what Cam Newton said about him, that he's the 10th best player on the team. It's seemingly kind of a slight, that he's just a guy who's surrounded by great talent and is just managing the game. He wouldn't have had that in Carolina. Even if he somehow got the starting job, it probably would have ended the same way for Matt Rule. And Brock Purdy may not be in the league right now, or he may be buried on somebody's bench. A lot of this, what happens to quarterbacks, is circumstance and where they wind up. And the Tom Brady story. The Tom Brady taken in the 6th round sits an entire year in New England. It's not like he started as a rookie. He came in the second game of the season in his second year and performed well, but was not really Tom Brady. That was a really good defensive team that ran the ball. I think his numbers for the Super Bowl victory in his first year, like 164 yards passing. So, a lot of this with quarterbacks, whether they're drafted number one overall, or the last pick of the entire draft like Brock Purdy, it's circumstance as to where they wind up, how they're developed, how much talent they have around them, what kind of coaching they have. There's so many things that go into this, and a lot of it is the spin of the roulette wheel. It's just, how it all works out for you. More on Cliff Kingsbury coming up. John Keim, who does a podcast, had Josh Weinfuss, who does in Arizona essentially what John does here in covering the Commanders. He covers the Cardinals, and he covered the Cliff Kingsbury era when he was the coach there for 4 years. And he will tell us and John what to expect as Cliff Kingsbury steps in as the offensive coordinator for the Commanders. We'll get to that and a lot more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Caps and Wizards owner Ted Leonsis says he's been hurt by the social media outrage over yanking the teams out of the district and moving to Virginia. Oh, poor Ted. We'll get to that at 9:45. 10 o'clock. The incredible stuff from Brent Musberger yesterday with Dan Patrick. You want to hang around for that. John Keim does a podcast. I think he's in partnership with Bram, if I'm not mistaken. And it's the John Keim podcast. And he has a lot of great analysis of the Commanders, who he's been covering for over 25 years. And yesterday he had on the guy who does essentially what John does for ESPN, covering the Commanders. Josh Weinfuss is the reporter who covers the Arizona Cardinals. And, of course, John Keim wanted to find out about Cliff Kingsbury, who's coming in as the offensive coordinator after spending 4 years as head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. And Weinfuss lays it out here in that he thinks that this is a great move for the Commanders, and this might be another example of the Peter principle, where people rise to their level of incompetence. That this is not the first person I've heard this from, but that Cliff Kingsbury is an excellent offensive guy, just not a good head coach. And this was Weinfuss yesterday with Bram on what we can expect with Cliff Kingsbury coming here as the offensive coordinator.
I think this is the best situation that he could be in. I don't think he was cut out to be a head coach. I think just the overall management of an NFL team, I think, was just a little too much for him. Because when he was here in Arizona for those 4 years, he was the offensive coordinator. He was essentially the de facto quarterbacks coach, and he was the head coach. So that's 3 pretty significant jobs, especially the head coach, when you're trying to be that CEO as well as a coordinator, and then you're trying to handle Kyler Murray as a quarterback and a rookie Kyler Murray, get him through all of that. And then you threw in kind of all the obstacles of the COVID years and the learning on Zoom. Like, it was just a lot. And I think he's better suited and cut out to be just an offensive guy. And he has a very impressive, talented offensive mind. I think he learned a lot about being calling plays in the NFL, designing plays in the NFL, running an offense in the NFL, that I think he will benefit him this time around.
And so some of those, like the air raid, has the reputation of being a very pass-heavy attack, right? And spread the field, man-to-man coverage, just attack. That's not how it seemed to unfold in Arizona. And I know, like, the stats where I think it's like, I think I have these, I know they're right, I think, but it's like 10th, during his tenure in Arizona, 10th in total rush attempts. I think it's 9th in yards per carry and 11th in yards per game, something along they may be reversed, but it's something along those lines. So what's your take on that part?
Here's the thing. When Cliff Kingsbury runs the air raid, it's his version of the air raid, right? Because the traditional air raid is 5 wide, 10 personnel. You're doing it all, like that's all you're running. And he, even going back to his time at Texas Tech, he had a run-based version of the air raid, which is rare. You don't see that a lot. I think he had 1,000-yard rusher or 2,000-yard rushers in his 6 years at Texas Tech. You already had the stats on the running game in the NFL. His time in the NFL. So he knows in order to win at this level that you have to run the ball. And so it's not a traditional air raid. It has a lot of components of the air raid. They will go 3 wide. They will utilize their X receiver quite a bit, and they will throw the ball over the top as much as they can. But the one thing that I think his issue was as a play caller and a play designer is his stuff got stale mid-season every year. And once teams figured out what they were doing with that iteration of the roster and they adjusted, he never counter-adjusted. And that was an issue for this entire time here. And I think if he's learned from that, if Dan Quinn maybe pushes him a little bit to do that more, if the need arises, I think we could see some changes. But to me, that's the biggest issue with hiring Cliff Kingsbury is nothing really changed as the year went on.
And I was going to ask you about that because the numbers are pretty clear, but the 1-loss record with the offense and all that is exactly that. When you were there and you guys would clearly ask him about it, what would he say as the reason why that never evolved? Because you would think if he's going to learn it, if he didn't learn it there, why would he learn it here?
Well, the answer we would typically get is, oh, we're making adjustments. We're making adjustments. We're like, not really making adjustments, right? Like we could see it. Like everyone could see it. They were really good in the first half of the season. His team was like that in college. So it's not just a one-off in the NFL. It was a trend. So I think if it were to change, it would be because he doesn't have to worry about running an entire organization. He can just focus on one thing. The man loves film. People think he's this party guy, this frat bro. And I mean, honestly, like he gets to the facility between 3:30 and 4:30 probably 4:30 is late. So around 3:34 every single morning. And he'll get his workout in and he'll just turn on the film and then just watch film. Watch tape after tape after tape. And it's not just of what his teams are doing. He loves scouring college film to come up with plays here or there. He'll watch other NFL films day and night, just do what everyone's doing. He's a big trend guy. So he's very well versed, right? He's very well educated in what's being ran around the country in all levels. He loves finding stuff like D3 schools in the middle, like Abilene Christian, stuff like that. He'll find stuff everywhere, NAIA schools. So I think that maybe this is a time for him to kind of just focus on that and not have to worry about in colleges recruiting. In the NFL, it was just management of people on both sides of the ball. So I think that this could be an opportunity for him to just laser in on that. And I mean, will he change? I don't know, but I think this is the best opportunity for us to see possible change from Kingsbury.
So that's Josh Weinfuss, who is the reporter who covers the Cardinals for ESPN, on with John Keim. And the big takeaway is, the reason that the Cardinals always had those great starts and terrible finishes is, according to Weinfuss, is that they got stale and they didn't make changes and they didn't evolve. And, he would say to reporters, oh, yeah, we're making adjustments, we're making changes, but they really didn't. And one of the things that Dan Quinn stressed at his news conference this week was that he has changed. Whatever he was running in Seattle when they had Legion of Boom and that was working so well, the league changed and he needed to change with it. And he said after he got fired in Atlanta, it gave him time to step back and look at what he was doing and make changes. So I think that's going to be something that is going to be interesting between the two of them, that if Dan Quinn as the head coach, where he says he's going to be the CEO, charge of everything, not going to call the defensive signals, going to be in charge of the whole team, he may be looking at what they're doing offensively with Cliff Kingsbury, and he's going to leave the offense to him, but he's going to say, hey, this is what we were doing in September. Teams have adjusted. We're now in December, and we've got to make these changes. So I think that was the big takeaway for me for what came out of that conversation yesterday, and that, again, is is John Keim's podcast, which you can find anywhere, wherever podcasts are sold. Don't talk a lot of hockey here. I tell you, I'm a casual hockey fan. I'll watch the Caps in the playoffs and very little here and there, regular season games on television. Like to go to the games. I think most people really enjoy being at a hockey game. But they are one of the primary teams here in this area and have been largely successful really for 40 years. Ever since the Rod Langway trade of 1982, at a time when this franchise was teetering, there was some belief that the team might be sold or moved. There were all kinds of things that were going on at the time, and they became a playoff team with Langway and then, segueing into now the Ovechkin era. But they're in a ticklish situation now, and Barry Zerluga wrote a column about this, and I've been saying some of these things in recent weeks. The Alex Ovechkin situation makes things very complicated for them with the trade deadline 1 month from today. It's exactly a month away. And they're 7 points out of a wild card spot after yet another bad loss the other night, 5-2 to Montreal. They're playing another good team on the road tonight, Carolina. The chances of the playoffs don't look good. And in this situation in years past, with Ovechkin in his prime, Backstrom, Kuznetsov, guys like that, that you would make additions to have that playoff push. And who knows what happens once you get into playoffs. You could win a Stanley Cup as a low seed, which they've been to the Stanley Cup as like a 4 or 5 seed. When they won the Cup, they were not the top seed in hockey. Those things happen. But you now have a team that's in kind of a rebuild, but also trying to get Alex Ovechkin to the Wayne Gretzky record, and he needs 62 goals. And his goals this year are way down. He's got 10 goals in 45 games played. He's missed 3. Teams played 48, but he's only got 10 goals. And you want to get him the record. He's got 2 years left on his contract after this. He needs 62. Going into this season, you'd say, oh, it's a slam dunk. He'll get it over the next 3. Well, what if he winds up, as projections are with the pace he's on, with 17 goals this year? He's still way short of getting Wayne Gretzky's record. And at 832 goals, he does not have either Nick Backstrom, who doesn't look like he's going to play again, started to play this year, hip injury, and is out for the season, and Kuznetsov, who is apparently experiencing some personal problems, and he's in the league program to help him address that. We don't know if he's coming back. Here are the numbers of those 832 goals, according to Barry, with most of them coming with either Backstrom or Kuznetsov on the ice. An assist of 376 on them. That's north of 45%, so almost half. And, he's at a pace now. Here's the pace as he lays it out. Capitals are 30th in a 32-team league in goals per game, and it's not all on Ovechkin, but he's not helping. He has those 10 goals in his 45 games. It contributes to the Caps' predicament. Consider that through the first 18 seasons of his career, Ovechkin scored 0.6 goals per game. Even after coming off his 13th 40-goal season at age 38, he figured to slow down some, but not this much. It's a crash. He's scoring just 0.2 goals per game, now on pace for 17 goals. Ovechkin says, it's up to me. It's what I have to do to get better, to get the shots in. Well, they're again, not scoring as you see there, 30 of 32. And of the wins that they've had, 22 wins, 17 of them have been either made by 1 goal or 2-goal victories, capped by an empty netter. Caps have 19 regulation losses. 15 have come by 3 or more goals, all but Laffers, including Tuesday, in a rare game against a team behind them in the standings. And so, as you look at what the Caps are going to do at the deadline 1 month from today, do you say, well, we're not going to be a playoff team this year, so we need to be sellers. But if you're sellers, do you slow down the Ovechkin pace even more? I mean, I think the last thing they want is to come to the end of this current contract, which has what's left of this year, the 34 games remaining this season, and then the 2 seasons ahead, and you get to the end of what would be, I guess, the 25-26 season, where Ovechkin's 40 years old. I guess you do sign him to another 1-year contract. You do it that way, and just trying to milk it along. But I don't think he's happy in this situation. Trying to milk it along and getting goals at this rate. It's just probably a very tough situation for everybody involved, and the complicating factor of this, which didn't seem to be such a big deal. He had 40 goals last season. Let's say he was going to drop off a little. He would have 30. Well, he may wind up with half that. 16, 17 goals, maybe even less. Who knows? And it's just not happening, especially they're playing good teams now. So that's going to be a tough situation. I don't think there have been many teams that have been in this spot before where, you want to rebuild the roster and get it young, but on the other hand, you want to make sure that this 38-year-old guy gets his record in a Caps uniform. It's very ticklish. How about this? Elena Delle Donne, who's 34 years old, and she has she's dealt with some things in her life that a lot of people don't deal with. I'm sure you're aware of this, that she has a sister who she's very, very close with, who is both deaf and blind, and she lives in Delaware, and she wants to be close to her. They're soulmates. And Elena Delle Donne had signed with Connecticut when she came out of high school. She's one of the top players in the country, and that's where they went. Well, all of them went there at that time. And she was there for like a couple of weeks, got homesick, and said she didn't want to play basketball anymore. Enrolled at Delaware, played volleyball for a year, then came back and played basketball and got to the WNBA and has become one of the best players in the history of the league. She's won the MVP a couple of times, and she led the Mystics to their one championship in 2019. She reportedly is not going to play this year or wants to step away from the game, and who knows, that may lead to retirement because she's had a lot of issues with her back over the years, but she's apparently not going to play this year. She's turning down, and this is the maximum, according to league rules, that that can be offered to her, $241,984. WNBA doesn't make money, so there's that. It's not like the NBA, and it's carried by the league as a loss leader to, I think, keep a segment of the fan base more interested in the league. But you look at Elena Delle Donne, who's the two-time MVP, the best player on the Mystics, and that's the max that she can be offered. Meantime, you have this guy, Jordan Poole, who's a mess right now. He's making $28 million a year, and that contract has 3 more years to go after this one. And last night, Jordan Poole was on the floor for 24 minutes. He hoisted 5 shots. None of them went in, and fouled out. He had 6 personal fouls. He did have 5 assists and 2 rebounds, but he's paid to score. 0 for 5 from the field. 0 points. 0 points. Lowest he's had since he was a rookie, actually playing against the Wizards. And they've got the trade deadline today. I'm sure they'd like to deal him in that contract. They're not going to be able to do that. We'll see if Kyle Kuzma goes. He's, boy, without him, it doesn't really even matter. They've only won 9 games this year, so if they could conceivably lose out if they get rid of him. He had 28 last night, and he might be, a missing piece for somebody. That was one of the good moves that they made under the Tommy Shepard regime when they made that trade with Russell Westbrook and getting him here. That was a good move. But man, I mean, if you're looking for pieces to trade, Corey Kispert, he had a pretty good game last night. Is he in demand? They want to build a future around Bilal Coulibaly, who looks like he's going to be very good, though he didn't contribute very much last night. He had just 6 points. And of course, they never play defense, but giving up 114 points is not so bad for them because they've been the last team in the league throughout the year in defense. But they gave up 114 last night, 40 of them to Donovan Mitchell, who lit them up 14 of 25 from the field, 7 of 7 from the line. Guess what? They got the best team in the league coming up. They're playing at Boston tomorrow night. Boston is number 1 in the NBA at 39-12. Won't that be a joy? Ted Leonsis, feelings a little bit hurt. Going around from television station to television station, giving interviews to make the case that, yeah, you should be excited that he's yanking the Wizards and the Caps out of D.C. Come on, it's going to be great. We're going to be in Virginia. You're going to love this. Oh, really? We'll hear what he had to say to Channel 9 last night as we continue. Citizen Ted making his case that Virginia is the place you want to be. We'll get to that and more as we continue. Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So 38 years ago today, something happened that I wish would have happened when Bob Irsay yanked the Colts out of Baltimore and headed to Indianapolis in the middle of the night in Mayflower moving vans, which is, we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of that. But in 1996, this happened with the Cleveland Browns moving to Baltimore. So Baltimore got a team back, but they stole the Browns out of Cleveland. But a deal was made, and it should have been made in Baltimore, that the Colts name and logo stayed, and Indianapolis would have a different name. I think it would be so cool if those blue and white colors were still in Baltimore with the horseshoe helmets and the whole thing, and memories of Johnny Unitas and all that. But that's long gone. It's, there are generations now who've grown up with the Ravens. But if that logo had stayed, I think there'd be a different feel for that organization. The Browns, whether they were smart enough to do this or whether they were told to do this, whatever happened, they did it the right way. So the name and logo stayed in Cleveland. The team moved to Baltimore. They got a new name, new logo. And then when the Browns came back as an expansion team 3 years later, you had the name and the colors and the logo. And I'll give you the backstory coming up at 10:45 on that. Also, at 10 o'clock, the great stuff from Brent Musberger yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show. Meantime, Ted Leonsis is campaigning. And he's trying to get it across to all those who have lashed out on social media about Ted taking the Caps and the Wizards and moving them to Potomac Yard, to a 20,000-seat arena, which is going to open, I don't know when, but some years down the road. And why is this outrage happening? Ted wants to know. He says, I've been hurt, but that's my personality. He says, I'm not your typical average business person. I care what people think. Well, here's what people think, Ted. They think you're rotten for taking the teams out of D.C., okay? That's what they think. But this new site is going to line his pockets very, very well. It's going to be very, very profitable for Mr. Ted, and his group is still going to, I guess, be tenants of Capital One Arena, and he's telling us, it'll be fine. We're going to have lots of great stuff there. The Mystics are going to play there. We're going to have women's college basketball games. We're going to have the circus. It's going to be just grand. But those teams that you've been spending your hard-earned money on for years and helping to revitalize the district, which is what Abe Pollin did when he built the arena with his own money there 30 years ago when that happened. Sorry. They're going to be in Virginia now. So Ted made the rounds, talked to various reporters at television stations yesterday, and this was how WUSA handled it with their investigative reporter, Eric Flack.
Ted Leonsis told me he's been hurt and actually a little surprised at the outrage he's seen, especially on social media, about his proposal to move the Capitals and the Wizards from their home here at Capital One Arena to a new facility in Alexandria.
So it really was an issue of the potential of having this blank slate, if you will, and starting from scratch and imagining how can we build an iconic next generation, kind of all digital interactive campus. That's what I was most focused on. What will sports be looking like? What will the fan experience be looking like 10, 20, 30 years from now?
The 20,000-seat arena would sit on 12 acres in Potomac Yard, paid for with a $2.8 billion loan from Virginia, $400 million from Monumental, and Alexandria would kick in $100 million. But opposition is mounting, largely over traffic concerns. And a lot of people are concerned about it out there.
Yes, and they have every right to be, but there's traffic today. We want to be a solution to the traffic. You have to take a look. I keep hearing about the metro stop. Mm-hmm. And I go,
and is it big enough? And can it handle it?
I'm glad you asked that question. So Nationals Park had a metro stop. Their stadium is twice as big as our arena. Same amount of cars as Potomac, same size of, so what did the Nationals do? What did the city do to accommodate the Nationals? They added 2 elevators. They added easier ways to get in and out. That's what we're going to have to do there.
I asked Leonsis if there was any chance the Caps and the Wiz would stay here at Capital One Arena, and he told me, quote, the die is cast, but he acknowledged he still needs the approval of the Virginia legislature.
And let's hope that that doesn't happen. As far as those elevators that were put in and the expansion of the Navy Yard stop for the Nats, he's not saying he's going to pay for it. He kind of walked in the direction of, Nationals, what did they do? Oh, well, what did the city do? Yeah. And the cash-strapped Metro, they're going to accommodate you by redoing that Metro stop for hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever it costs. Also, in another part of this interview, he was asked if fans from Maryland would still make the trip because they did some independent polling of this and finding out how many people from Maryland would be willing to do this, and there's a lot of hesitancy on that. And the thing about the district, and if you grew up here, you know this. If you grew up in Maryland, you never went to Virginia. If you grew up in Virginia, you never went to Maryland. But everybody went to D.C. And I guess this is going to be successful. He's getting the state to kick in all that money, $2.8 billion, and he's only putting up $400 million to make that happen. But he was asked about the trip from Maryland, and he said the drive from his home in Potomac to the new arena site will be 8 minutes shorter once construction on the GW Parkway is complete compared to his current commute to Capital One Arena. Well, I'm glad it's so more convenient for you, Ted. I think that's just great that your commute is going to be 8 minutes shorter to go to Virginia. Now, as far as the die being cast, these are some more details from Channel 9. Virginia would be required to pay off the $2.8 billion in moral obligation bonds if the arena did not meet financial revenue projections, but Monumental Sports and Entertainment said that won't happen for 3 reasons. Only 1/3 of the projected revenue is needed to pay off the bond. The rest go to Arlington and the state. The Virginia Sports Authority, which would be created to authorize the loan, would be required to put 2 years of payments in a rainy day reserve fund just in case. And the lending institution and Virginia government take a conservative approach to revenue estimates, providing what's known in the financial industry as 2 times coverage on the loan. Now, when Nats Park was built, if you remember this gone back now about 20 years, there was opposition led by city council person, member Linda Kropp, and she said we're not going to be able to meet the revenue. It's not going to, we're going to have to put up $400 million to build this stadium, and it's not going to pay itself off. Well, it already has. They were projecting 20 years or maybe even 30 years, but that has paid off. So this may pay off for Virginia and the $2.8 billion loan. But it's just awful. It's awful for D.C., and it's really not what Abe Pollin had in mind when he built the arena. He wanted originally to move from Baltimore to D.C. when he moved the Bullets here in 1973. He tried to get something done with the district. Didn't happen. So he said, okay, I'll just do this myself, and he built out in Landover. And Landover wasn't great. And believe me, that was not a great location, schlepping around the Beltway to get to games, but it was all we had. It was the biggest arena. So when Capital One Arena, or I guess it opened as the MCI Center in December of 1997, this was a huge thing. This was wonderful, and you saw what it did for the area. Sadly, there are some things that have transpired since then, including the rise of crime, and there are more things that are happening around the arena. It's more difficult to get cops hired in the city. There's a tremendous police shortage, and so the police presence for games is lowered. Ted is having to hire off-duty cops to do that. He doesn't like doing that. So he's moving the team out, and he's taking this sweet deal from Virginia. And he can say all he wants about, National Airport, it's Washington's airport, and it's actually in Virginia. Did you know that? So what? And as far as, the distance, okay, great. It's a shorter commute from Potomac. Mazel tov for that. But other people who are trying to get there in rush hour traffic, and is that 8-minute commute when he goes, which is probably not, an hour and a half before the game starts because people have to get home from work, and they have to be able to, get in their cars and get out to the game. Sure, there are going to be some people who are going to commute maybe right from work and in the district, and the people who work in Virginia. But I just don't see this as a good thing at all. And for him to say, "Oh, I've been hurt by this, and I'm not your typical average business person." Well, what is a typical average business person? Who is that, Ted? You are, because you're going for the money. You're going for the cash. And there's a model for this. This is what happened in Atlanta. They moved out to a suburban area similar to what they have here with this Alexandria proposal. And you're going to be in Potomac Yard, but it's a traffic nightmare. And saying that the city has to pay for a Virginia Metro stop to be upgraded, it's just awful. It's just a really, really sickening situation. And it's down the road. It's probably 4, maybe 5 years from now. Hopefully he's got a better product to sell them. If he schleps this basketball team into Alexandria, the one that's 9-41 now, how about that? And a hockey team, which at that point almost certainly won't have Alex Ovechkin, and maybe will be good and maybe won't. People just aren't going to do it. And they're not going to do it initially. And maybe over time things will pick up. But, Tom Lavera has written about this. What Michael Jordan did as a Wizard was not what was promised. And he played for 2 years, and he did not produce a playoff team, and they fired him. And the scene of Jordan driving his Mercedes-Benz with Illinois plates out of Capital One Arena or MCI Center will never be forgotten. He never invested here. But what Tom says is the 2 years that he played and filled the arena every night, and he did play every night. Good for Jordan at that time. Wasn't as good as he was in Chicago, but he was still Michael Jordan. People showed up. That helped to really get the arena off the ground, because that was the 2001-2002 season when he first started. The arena was only 4 years old, and a lot of the Caps fans had not really made the transition from Landover to downtown D.C., and a lot of the Wizards fans, same thing. So it was sort of a way to kind of launch the place with Jordan. You may need something like that in Alexandria. I don't know if it's going to be an immediate hit like you hope it will be, and you'll pay off all your loans and all the other stuff that goes with it. All right, let me get to Brent Musberger coming up. I really enjoyed the conversation he had with Dan Patrick yesterday, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to enjoy some of it as well. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. So, Cam Newton, 0 for 1 in Super Bowl appearances, says Brock Purdy is the 10th best player on the 49ers offense. Yeah, he'll elaborate on that coming up later this hour. Also later this hour, 28 years ago today, ruling was made which was so smart that while the Cleveland Browns had already moved to Baltimore, the name and the logo stayed, so that when an expansion team came in a few years later, they became the Cleveland Browns, and Baltimore had to come up with a new name and a new logo, which they did, which should have happened when Baltimore lost its team 40 years ago when the Colts moved to Indianapolis. But we'll explore that and some of the ways that all came together later this hour. Also, Jim Nantz was on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday, told a couple of nice little things about what he's going to be doing for the game on Sunday. It's his 7th Super Bowl, and he said the first play that he ever called as a Super Bowl broadcaster was a kick return for a touchdown. It's the only time it's happened in 57 Super Bowls. It was Devin Hester taking it back against the Colts in Miami, and it has not happened since. May not happen again with the way they've changed the kickoff rules. So Jim Nantz may go down as the only broadcaster in the history of the Super Bowl to ever call a kickoff return for a touchdown. And that was pretty much it for the Bears that day. The Colts were dominant the rest of the way in the rain. It was Rex Grossman who was quarterbacking the Bears, for God's sakes, and they were no match for Peyton Manning and the Indianapolis Colts. But also on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday was Brent Musberger. Brent, to me, is so much a part of the rise of the popularity of football. And incredibly, as Dan noted, he's not in the Hall of Fame. Jim Nantz, he's in the Hall of Fame, got in 2011. There are a lot of people. It's the Pete Rozelle Award that's given out. You don't get a bust in Canton, but you get inducted in the Hall of Fame. Chris Berman, I think, is in the Football Hall of Fame. Brent Musberger is not. He's 83 years old. He has always given you that wink, wink, nod, nod on gambling. He's been a gambler his whole life. He makes no bones about it. And now he has his own network, VISN, which he runs out of Las Vegas. He lives there, and he participates in shows on the network. He did the Raiders games for a few years, and his touchdown call was great. It was jackpot. Jackpot was his touchdown call. But he talked yesterday about how gambling has changed with football and how it's led to the popularity of it. And tells, even at 83, still has his fastball, telling stories of how gambling evolved with the NFL.
In the old days, we used to come out here and my buddy Jimmy the Greek, we would go to the Barbary Coast and stand in line at a window. And I said, Greek, how come you always come to the Barbary Coast? He said, Brent, because in parlays, ties win. Okay, so so now the Greek and I, we would just, I use the phone because I live here in Las Vegas and have the different apps with the casinos, and you're tracked. I mean, everybody's got a cell phone.
Yeah.
So you get ads that come your way based upon what you're looking at. I mean, the technology is unbelievable. Tracks you where you are, knows all things about you. And so, listen, they know about every gambler who comes on board, whether he's the $20,000 bettor or the $20 bettor. They know.
What's the most you bet on a football game?
On a single game? And the Greek and I, maybe 5,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's back in the 70s that you bet $5,000?
Yeah, let's see. That was in the 80s.
Okay.
Good story.
Yes.
So, the Eagles, coached by Dick Vermeil, are playing the Raiders, owned by Al Davis. And you should know, I think I've told you about this before, the Greek and Al Davis were the closest of friends. I don't ever remember Jimmy coming on the NFL Today without having talked to Al either on Saturday night or Sunday morning. They're getting the latest scoop, okay, around the league. So Al said to Jimmy, we were down in New Orleans, and he said, Greek, he called him Greek. Greek, the Eagles aren't fast enough to stay with us. They don't have enough speed. And Al was a speed guy. That's what made the Raiders in the early days.
So this is the Super Bowl, Ron Jaworski against the Raiders.
Yep.
Rod Martin.
Okay. You remember him?
Yeah.
And Jaws.
Jaws,
and all
yeah.
that. So the Greek came, right, how much money can you raise? Okay.
Raise.
I said, well, let me go around and see. So I think I was collecting $5 bills from somebody that we did together, and it was no contest. I mean, the Raiders got it on top and took it home, and it was an easy. I think it was the biggest win of the Greek's life.
That sounds like insider trading there, Brent, is what that does.
To that point, the integrity of the game, insider trading, that's why the NFL has always been the best of all the pro leagues about injuries. Injuries are critical information for bettors, okay? I was asked by somebody yesterday, I was over at Circa at the VSiN studio, and I was asked, how's Kittle's toe? I said, well, I'm assuming it's going to be okay because they haven't, but we won't get our first injury report until today. Today is actually the first practice day for the Niners and the Chiefs.
Today being yesterday, so they worked out yesterday, will work out again today. This was the best story that Brent Musberger told, in my opinion, with Dan Patrick yesterday. I just love this. You have seen this photo. It's one of the most iconic Super Bowl photos in history, and it's not on the field. It's Joe Namath in a bathing suit, sitting on a lounge chair at the hotel in Miami, actually in Fort Lauderdale, as you'll hear here. And he is surrounded by sports writers, including Pulitzer Prize winner Dave Anderson of the New York Times, several others who had really prominent careers, and a very young Brent Musberger, who was working for an afternoon paper in Chicago. and it just speaks to a time which is so different than today. I mean, for Joe Namath to be sitting at the hotel pool by himself, getting some sun with, fans in the hotel. This was the team hotel, but the Jets didn't occupy every single room. It just, you couldn't imagine that today. And wait till you hear about how Musberger and his sports writing buddies got access to Joe Namath at the hotel for this photo, which, again, would never happen today. This is Brent with the backstory of that unbelievable photo of Joe Namath sunning himself at the hotel in Fort Lauderdale prior to Super Bowl III.
In the old days, we used to come out here and my buddy Jimmy the Greek, we would go to the barbering.
Nope, that wasn't it. I hit the wrong button. Here it is. This is, again, I had such a good setup there. Let me do this again. This is the backstory of the iconic photo of Joe Namath sunning himself before Super Bowl III.
It's an amazing story because a group of us, Jerry Green was there from Detroit, Cy Burek from Dayton. So we got in our cars, and I think we took a couple taxis, actually. They were staying in Lauderdale. So we went up to the hotel, and in those days, today, if you try to go into the hotel, you're going to get stopped at the door. You're not going in to see anybody from the Chiefs or the Niners. But in those days, it was wide open. So we went to the bellman and asked him, is there anybody around from the Jets? I said, hey, Namath is out back by the pool. Bada bing. Out we go. There were people down. He was so accommodating. There were fans out there. They had surrounded his lounge chair and getting his autograph and asking him about the game, and he was just stretched out enjoying the sunshine. And so about half dozen of us went out there and interviewed him. Now, he actually made the promise that they were going to win the night before at a dinner, at a gala at a country club. That's where he first made it, okay. All right? I was there with Dave Anderson for the New York Times and my wife. We went out and had dinner, and he stood up. He said it kind of matter-of-factly, okay, I guarantee we'll win this game. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, it later it sounded like it was braggadocio, but he didn't express it that way. He just, okay, we're going to win. And away we spent out there at poolside. There's the famous picture of us out there. And we were out there for a good hour with him. And he finally had to go in for a meeting. But Joe was always great with fans. I mean, people even now, he lives down in Jupiter, Florida, when I lived down there, and people would stop him for his autograph and that.
But I wonder if the Jets don't win that game, what happens, what changes, if anything, in the NFL, AFL?
I'm not so sure that the complete merger comes about, to tell you the truth.
Most important game in
history? I call it
the
most important game in the history of what we now call the National Football League, okay? Mm-hmm. The first game, which I covered as a writer, was in the Los Angeles Coliseum. Chiefs were there, and they lost to Vince Lombardi and the Packers. Lombardi, he felt a lot of pressure, Dan, and he hid the Packers up in Santa Barbara, and he made it clear to all of us, stay away. We never talked to Lombardi before the game. Hank Stram, come on, let's have a cocktail in Long Beach. You know what I'm saying? He was entirely.
So Vince
different.
is worried that if they lost to the AFL,
he felt the pressure of the entire National Football League on his shoulders.
And then
we
won
later
two
talked
of those.
a long time about it.
Yeah.
And he said it was the most pressure he'd ever felt going into a game. So, all right, the NFL wins the first two. Okay, they go down, they win the second one, Packers, and that was Vince's last game when he beats the Raiders. Last game as coach of the Packers. So then we come to Super Bowl III. And because of what Vince had accomplished the first 2 years, all the bookmakers out here made the Colts an 18-point favorite, okay? An 18-point favorite, okay? You talk about easy money if you were a Jets fan, okay? And you knew Vinny down in the bar or something, you know what I'm saying? So it was stunning. Earl Morrall, Johnny Unitas, both quarterbacking the Colts, couldn't get it done. And the Jets one going away, and now suddenly that forces the hand. We got to have a complete merger between the old AFL and the NFL. It is the most important game in the history of the league, bar none. I mean, that and the first one, because the Packers were able to beat the Chiefs in Super Bowl I.
That's interesting. I'd have to research that a little more. That's Brent saying that if the Colts win, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a merger. It's my understanding, I may be wrong about this, but it's my understanding that when the merger was agreed to prior to the first Super Bowl, that this was going to usher it in, that there would be this championship game between the two leagues. They didn't call it the Super Bowl for the first two. I think it was about that time of Super Bowl III where the Jets and the Colts played. They called it the Super Bowl. But it's my understanding that the complete merger had already been agreed to. What Brent is saying, if the Colts win, it's possible you still have two separate leagues. I'm not so sure about that. But, I'm not going to argue with Brent on that. Also, one other correction. I'm glad that I have people who listen to the show and pass these things along on Twitter. I believe I said when talking about Jim Nantz doing his 7th Super Bowl that he's the only broadcaster who called a kickoff return for a touchdown. Obviously, that's ridiculous. Fulton Walker did it. I was there when he did it for the Miami Dolphins. I guess Stanford Jennings did it as well for the Cincinnati Bengals. So my mistake. He's the Devin Hester one was the only one to lead off a game. So that's what it is. The first and maybe the only kickoff return for a touchdown to start off a game. So thank you again. That's Andy Krause for correcting me on that. More from Brent Musberger, last story that he told from the Dan Patrick Show. And if you don't know this, I'm really looking forward to this as well. On Sunday at 1 o'clock, before they launch into their, 4.5-hour pregame show on CBS, they're going to do a documentary on the pregame show that started it all, the NFL Today, which was hosted by Brent Musberger with Irv Cross, Phyllis George, and Jimmy the Greek. If you grew up in the 70s, that was the pregame show that you watched. I guess NBC did one. I never saw it. That was it. That was this pregame show that everybody watched. It was the NFL Today, and it is, I think, still the best and the one that paved the way for all the pregame stuff that we have now on the various networks. And this is Brent telling the story of just how that show evolved.
We had announcers who went to the games to do halftime and postgame, and I was one. And we got a call from the head of sports at CBS, Bob Wessler, and he said, Brent, Jack Whitaker and Pat Summerall tape a show on Friday, okay? He said, but I want to eliminate that and go live for the 30 minutes, okay? And he said, do you know Irv Cross? And I laughed, and I said, I know him very well because we were at Northwestern together, and I was a gopher, really, for the Daily Northwestern. The sports editor was upperclassman, and so I would have to go get quotes from Coach Eric Parsegan, who was there before he went to Notre Dame, and Irv, and I said, Irv is a delightful man. And I said, heck of an athlete. So it was going to be the two of us. And about 6 weeks later, I get a call from Mr. Wessler, and he said, Brent, do you know a Miss America by the name of Phyllis George? And I go, Bob, I'm sorry, but I really don't follow the Miss America pageant. I said, if you ask me who the quarterback is for the Colts, I might be able to tell you. And he said, I want to bring her in on the show. Now, I'm not going to say no, let's do it. And it was a great addition because Irv and I had rehearsed and practiced in halftime. We know how to do the highlights and all that. But Phyllis was one of those special personalities, Dan. She lit up a room. Yeah. And at that time, there were no women sportscasters around, okay? There was a Jane Chastain was working at it down in Miami, and that was the only one I remember. But the folks, the men in particular, they welcomed Phyllis on a Sunday morning. And she wound up being just a great host. And then the next year, the summer, I get a call, Brent, do you know a gambler by the name of Jimmy the Greek? And I said, are you kidding? When I stopped by Las Vegas, of course I know the Greek. I want to put him on the show. And I hesitate there, and I said, what does the commissioner think? Oh, we're going to have a meeting with him. He's going to be fine. Now, the one thing I knew about Pete Rozelle, I'd always seen him at the Kentucky Derby. And I knew he was a horse player. I'd seen him at Actors. So I said, well, he knows a little bit about gambling. So we had a delightful meeting. It was Wessler, the Greek, and Brent over in Park Avenue, the NFL office. It could not have been nicer. And we get up to leave, and he said, one thing, he said, I'd like to ask a favor. Now, when a commissioner tells the three of us a favor, you know it's an order coming down the line, okay? He said, I want you guys, when you do your show, please don't mention -3, +7. Now, okay, I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's the whole point of this exercise. So, but we all said, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And on the way back, we said, what are we going to do? And we brought in some of the technical people, and we rehearsed, and they managed to devise the checkboard for the Greek. People remember those early days, okay. And if the Greek checked about 4 on one side, you knew it was cover 7. That team's going to cover the deal. And then one day, about 3 years later, the Greek took ill and couldn't make the show. We found out on Saturday, and I said, well, listen, my friend Pete Rose is in town, and I knew he liked to gamble on anything that moved. So I called Pete, and I said, Pete, I know this is Brett. I said, listen, a favor, can you come over? And so he came over. And to this day, when I run into him, he said, you should have kept me. I was a better handicapper than the Greek. Okay, that was my guy, Pete Rose. Okay.
I don't know if I've ever heard that before. And is there any tape of Pete Rose filling in for Jimmy the Greek? Also, Pete Rose was still playing in those days. You know, and baseball's golden rule about gambling, which he broke as a player, as it turns out, because there's been some investigative stuff done, and they found some betting slips that indicated he bet as a player, even though he's now maintaining he only bet as a manager, whatever it was. I don't know. Did baseball have any kickback on that? Pete Rose, you know, he didn't, as Brent said, you couldn't give point spreads, you couldn't give things like that, so you know, I guess it technically wasn't gambling because you were just, you know, kind of looking at the game and seeing who you liked there, and you weren't talking about point spreads. But that was stunning to me. And then, yes, I do remember the checkboard. That was great. You know, where he'd say, it's special teams, check. You know, defense, check. Offense, check. You go, okay, yeah, they're going to cover the 7. And then now, of course, there are betting shows. There are shows just for betting. But Jimmy the Greek wasn't original, and the NFL Today was an original show. And having Phyllis George was a big part of it. You know, her most famous interview was with Roger Staubach. And Roger Staubach, the famous family man, you know, had several kids. And when he won the Super Bowl MVP, they gave him a Corvette, and he asked if he could trade it in for a station wagon. You know, that's the kind of guy he was. But he said, and this is one of the great things that ever came out of that show, he said to Phyllis George, he said, I like sex just as much as Joe Namath. I just like it with one girl. And meaning his wife, who was sitting right there. So there you go. That was just great. And by the way, if you're driving around before the Super Bowl on Sunday, I'm going to be doing a pregame show from the Crystal City Sports Pub from 3:30 to 5:30. I'm going to play some of that and some other things that we've accumulated over the last couple of weeks. So looking forward to doing that.